A nor'easter screams across Boston. On a desolate waterfront, a canine named Zeus plants himself, pulling his grieving police handler toward a solid bank of snow. A 5-year-old boy is buried inside. The air is frozen. A small red firefighter toy is clutched in a blue mitten, and an 80,000 bank transfer is complete. Behind a cruel lie waits a plan to steal a silent child's inheritance. His aunt told him to wait for his parents who were already in heaven. One police cruiser on patrol is more than just routine. Inside it, a canine partner's nose will detect the one scent the wind couldn't erase. And when Zeus digs, the scene will shift from a frozen grave to a desperate rescue, and from a cold case to a fight for justice. What happens next will make you believe in quiet miracles and the unbreakable bond between a man, a boy, and the dog God sent to find them. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. If you believe no child or animal should ever face fear alone, hit subscribe now and share this story with someone who needs hope. The city of Boston was disappearing. It vanished not in an instant, but particle by particle, consumed by the ethereal white of a nor'easter that had roared in off the Atlantic with the fury of a mythological beast. The wind didn't just howl, it screamed down the narrow, historic streets, sculpting canyons of snow that entombed cars and silenced the city. Streetlights cast a sickly, orange-gray glow upon the desolation, illuminating nothing but the chaotic dance of ice crystals. It was a night unfit for life, a night when the world held its breath, waiting for the cold to pass. And inside a rattling 10-year-old sedan fighting its way through the unplowed streets, Lorraine knew this was the perfect night to commit a sin. She gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white and chapped. Lorraine, at 42, was a woman who looked as if life had systematically sanded away all her soft edges. She was the younger sister of Caleb's mother, Ilara, but shared none of her siblings' remembered warmth. Lorraine's face was thin and pale, etched with the fine, bitter lines of disappointment. Her mousy brown hair, streaked with premature gray, was pulled back into a severe functional ponytail. She was a woman defined by what she lacked, and right now, she lacked patience. Her gaze flickered between the swirling vortex of snow outside and the small, silent figure in the passenger seat, strapped into a booster seat that wasn't his. In the back, her meager belongings were packed in 2 suitcases. In the passenger seat sat Caleb. At 5 years old, he was small for his age, a fragile echo of the vibrant parents he had lost 6 months prior in a fog-drenched collision on the Tobin Bridge. He was all enormous, solemn gray eyes, his father's eyes, set in a face too pale and thin. He hadn't spoken much since the accident, retreating into a world where silence was his only shield. He wore a blue puffy coat that was slightly too large and clutched a small, worn toy firefighter in his left mitten, the last gift from his father, Mark. He just watched the snow, his breath fogging the cold glass, his mind miles away, perhaps in a warmer, happier time. To Lorraine, his silence was an accusation. He was a 40-pound anchor of grief and responsibility, and she was drowning. The car's radio, which only crackled with static and storm warnings, was interrupted by the harsh buzz of her phone in the center console. The screen lit up. Vince. Lorraine's lips tightened. She let it ring twice before snatching it up, her voice a harsh whisper. "What? Are you done yet?" The voice on the other end was oily, impatient. This was Vince, a man Lorraine had met 3 months ago, a man who managed a failing bar and wore too much cheap cologne. He was her escape, her ticket out of the subsidized apartment, and the crushing weight of her sister's memory. Vince was not a complicated man. He liked cheap beer and an easy life, and an orphaned 5-year-old was not part of that equation. "The roads are closing, Lorraine. I'm not waiting around all night. It's him or me. You gotta make the choice." "I'm doing it," she hissed, glancing at Caleb. The boy didn't flinch, seemingly lost in the snow. "I'm almost there. Just wait." "Whatever. You got 1 hour, or I'm gone. And I'm taking the security deposit with me." The line clicked dead. A cold, brittle resolve settled over Lorraine. The anxiety that had been clawing at her throat dissolved, replaced by a chilling clarity. It was done. She couldn't go back. Vince was right. It was him or the boy. And Lorraine, for the first time in her life, was choosing herself. She turned the car, the tires slipping dangerously on the ice, and headed away from the dim lights of the city toward the industrial desolation of the South Boston waterfront. The area was a graveyard of abandoned warehouses and empty lots, a place where the wind howled off the icy water without obstruction. It was perfect. She pulled the car into an unplowed access road, stopping near a massive, snow-drifted concrete divider. She killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, broken only by the relentless shriek of the wind. She turned in her seat, forcing her cracked lips into a smile that was a grotesque mask of tenderness. "Caleb, honey, we're here." Caleb turned his large gray eyes toward her, questioning but silent. "We're at the special place, honey," Lorraine said, her voice acquiring a strange syrupy quality. She unbuckled her seatbelt and leaned over, her cold, chapped fingers fumbling with his booster seat buckle. You know how much Mommy and Daddy loved you, right?" At the mention of his parents, Caleb's expression shifted. A tiny flicker of light, of hope, ignited in his gaze. He nodded, clutching the firefighter toy tighter. "Well, I have a secret," Lorraine whispered, leaning in as if sharing a magical confidence. "A wonderful, wonderful secret. They called me. They miss you so much." Caleb's mouth parted slightly. They did?" His voice was a tiny, rusty whisper, unused. "Yes," Lorraine said, the lie flowing more easily now, emboldened by his reaction. "They told me they're coming back, just for tonight. They're coming to pick you up. They want to take you on a big trip, to a place with no snow." Caleb's entire being seemed to focus. "Here? Right here. This is the spot they chose. It's a magic waiting place." She opened her door, the wind tearing it from her hand and slamming it against the chassis. The cold was a physical blow. She got out and walked around to his side, opening his door. The icy air filled the car. "Come on, sweetie. We have to get you ready." She pulled him out. He was light, almost weightless. She led him through the knee-deep snow to the concrete divider, which offered a pathetic sliver of shelter from the direct wind. She brushed the snow off the top. "Now, you sit right here, okay? You have to be a good, quiet boy. It's part of the magic. They want to see you all by yourself. It's the rules." He looked impossibly small, perched on the concrete block, a tiny blue figure against the vast gray industrial waste. "But where are you going, Aunt Lorraine?" "I have to go get the car ready for them," she lied, backing away, the snow crunching under her boots. "I'll be right around the corner. You wait. Don't move from this spot, Caleb. Promise me you'll wait for them right here." "I promise," he whispered, his eyes fixed on the dark, empty road, expecting to see his parents' headlights at any moment. "Good boy." Lorraine walked back to the car, her movements quick and jerky. She got in, the driver's seat already cold. She jammed the key into the ignition, her hands shaking violently now. The engine turned over, roaring to life. She didn't look at him directly. She couldn't. She put the car in reverse, her eyes fixed on the rearview mirror. For one horrifying, eternal second, she saw him. He was sitting perfectly still, just as she'd told him. And then he raised his small, mittened hand and gave a tiny, hopeful wave. Lorraine's breath hitched. A single, hot tear of self-loathing scalded her cheek. She slammed her foot on the accelerator. The tires spun, spraying a plume of snow, and then they gripped. The car lurched backward, turned, and sped down the access road, its red taillights shrinking in the blizzard. Within seconds, the car was gone, and the sound of its engine was devoured by the wind. Caleb sat alone. He pulled his knees to his chest, tucking the firefighter toy inside his coat. He was being a good boy. He was waiting. The snow began to fall faster, no longer swirling, but descending in a thick, determined curtain. It began to settle on his shoulders and his hair, slowly, gently, covering the small blue spot on the concrete divider, burying the impossible hope that sat waiting in the heart of the storm. 10 miles away, a different kind of vehicle cut a lone path through the maelstrom. The heavy, reinforced chassis of a Boston Police K9 cruiser, its tires whining for grip on the treacherous ice, moved like a shark through dark water. The world outside its windows was a kinetic blur of white and gray, a sensory deprivation tank that muffled the city's life. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet, focused, and steeped in a familiar melancholy. At the wheel sat Officer Jack Sullivan, a man whose face seemed carved from the same granite as the city's oldest buildings. At 40, Jack possessed a rugged, weary strength. His jaw was square and often tight with thought, covered in a shadow of dark stubble. His hair was short, practical, a deep brown peppered with gray at the temples. But it was his eyes, a piercing, sharp blue that told his story. They were the eyes of a man who saw the world exactly as it was, and who was often disappointed by it. In the custom-fitted rear cabin, his partner lay alert, but at ease. Zeus, a 6-year-old German shepherd, was a magnificent animal. His coat was a deep, rich sable, dark on his back and fading to tan along his powerful legs. His ears were perpetually erect, satellites constantly scanning for data. Zeus was not a pet. He was a highly trained officer, an extension of Jack himself, and the bond between them was forged in thousands of hours of training and the silent understanding of shared risk. Tonight, however, was not about risk. It was about endurance, and for Jack, it was about memory. The relentless scraping sound of the windshield wipers was a metronome counting down the minutes, each one a somatic memory of 3 years ago tonight. 3 years ago, on this exact date, a drunk driver had hydroplaned on a rainy street, and Jack's wife, Sarah, had never made it home from her nursing shift. The storm, the date, the oppressive sense of isolation. It was a cruel trinity, and it left Jack's soul feeling as numb and frozen as the landscape. "Just another tour, Z," Jack murmured, his voice a low rumble in the cab. Zeus's ear twitched in response, acknowledging his handler's voice, but his eyes remained fixed on the white chaos beyond the glass. Their patrol was a grim one, checking on stranded motorists, responding to break-ins triggered by power outages, and just being visible. But out here, in the industrial wasteland bordering the waterfront, the same desolate expanse Lorraine had chosen, there was nothing to see. The area was notorious for dumping, but tonight, not even criminals were stupid enough to be out. Jack was about to turn the cruiser around, to head back toward the relative sanity of the city center, when the wind shifted. It was a violent, sudden gust that slammed the side of the cruiser, pushing it a few inches sideways on the ice. The wind carried more than just snow. It carried information. In the back, Zeus changed. It wasn't a bark. It was a subtle, instant transformation. His all relaxed posture vanished. His body went rigid, his head snapped to the passenger side window, and his nostrils flared, rapidly pulling in olfactory data. A low, sharp whine, a sound Jack had not heard in months, vibrated from his chest. "What is it?" Jack slowed the cruiser, his own senses instantly heightened, his grief evaporating in a rush of adrenaline. He peered through the snow. Nothing. Just the gray, looming shapes of abandoned warehouses and the concrete barrier lining the access road. Probably a deer, Z, or a coyote. Settle. But Zeus did not settle. He escalated. He moved from a whine to a series of sharp barks, huffs of focused sound, his front paws scratching at the armored window separating them. This was not the bark he used for aggression. This was his alert signal. It was a sound that meant I have found something human, and it is wrong. Jack trusted his partner implicitly. He trusted Zeus's nose more than he trusted his own eyes, especially tonight. Okay, I hear you." He stopped the cruiser, the vehicle idling high against the cold. He radioed his position. "K97, showing myself out of the vehicle, South Boston Industrial Access Road. My partner has a non-specific alert." The moment Jack opened his door, the storm tried to rip it from his grasp. The cold was a physical assault, a wall of ice particles that stung his exposed skin and stole his breath. He pulled his thick, fur-lined hat down, shielding his eyes as Zeus bounded from the rear compartment. The dog did not wait. He hit the snow and immediately went nose down, his powerful legs churning through the deep drift, pulling hard against his leash towards the concrete divider 50 yards away. "Zeus, heel!" Jack commanded, but the dog ignored him, straining against the leash with a desperate, whining bark. Jack knew this behavior. This was frantic. He let the leash go slack and followed, his heavy snow-covered boots sinking deep, his powerful flashlight cutting a clean, white cone through the swirling darkness. "What do you have, Z? What is it?" Zeus reached the concrete divider and began to dig, not just sniffing, but frantically clawing at a specific large drift that had formed against the barrier. "Zeus, no, stop!" Jack shouted, thinking it was a dead animal, perhaps a homeless person's frozen pet. He grabbed the dog's harness, but Zeus was relentless, his barks now a desperate, piercing cry. Jack pointed his flashlight at the spot Zeus was digging. At first, he saw nothing, just snow, white on white. Then, his beam caught a flicker of color. It wasn't gray concrete or brown earth. It was blue, a small patch of synthetic blue. Jack's heart stopped. "No," he whispered, the words stolen by the wind. He dropped to his knees beside his dog, shoving his gloved hands into the snowbank. The snow was packed hard, but his adrenaline-fueled strength tore it away. His fingers hit something solid, yet soft. It was a coat, a small sleeve. He dug faster, his breath sobbing in his chest, the world narrowing to the small circle of his flashlight. He uncovered a shoulder, then a hood, and then finally a face. It was a child, a little boy, pale as marble, his lips a terrifying shade of blue, his eyelashes frosted with ice. He was curled into a tight ball, his body mimicking the toy firefighter Jack saw clutched in his frozen mittened hand. Oh God, no. Jack tore off his own gloves, pressing 2 fingers against the tiny frozen neck. He waited. 1 second. 2. Nothing. Please. And then he felt it. Faint, thready. A pulse, a tiny, stubborn spark of life refusing to be extinguished. "He's alive!" Jack roared, more to himself than to the storm. He ripped open his own heavy police-issue winter coat, his training taking over his panic. He unzipped the boy's blue jacket, pulling the frozen, stiff layers away to press the child's frigid chest against his own warmer undershirt, creating a desperate cocoon of shared body heat. He wrapped his own coat around the tiny, limp form. He scooped the boy, who weighed almost nothing, into his arms and sprinted back toward the cruiser, Zeus barking triumphantly beside him, his duty done. Jack ripped the radio from his shoulder. "K97 to dispatch. I need EMS. I have a found child, approximately 5 years of age, severe hypothermia, non-responsive but breathing. Found abandoned on the waterfront access road. I am en route to Boston Medical Center now. Clear a path." He didn't wait for a reply. He threw the cruiser into gear, the siren and lights cutting through the blizzard, a beacon of sudden, desperate hope tearing through the heart of the indifferent storm. The K9 cruiser, a flashing, wailing beacon of red and blue, fishtailed on the ice-slicked street as it skidded into the ambulance bay of Boston Medical Center. The automatic doors to the emergency reception slid open, releasing a rectangle of harsh, fluorescent light onto the snow-covered pavement. Jack Sullivan didn't wait for the vehicle to fully stop. He was out, his own heavy coat still wrapped around the tiny, rigid form in his arms. He kicked open the glass door, the smell of antiseptic, burnt coffee, and sterile fear hitting him like a physical force. "I have a child!" he bellowed, his voice raw from the cold and his own radio calls. "Unresponsive, severe hypothermia, found abandoned." The chaotic ballet of the ER stopped for a beat, then converged. A team, led by a tall, gaunt man with exhausted eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, intercepted him. This was Dr. Elias Vance, the night shift's attending physician, a man who had seen everything Boston's worst nights had to offer and was rarely surprised. "Trauma 2 now," Vance ordered, his voice a sharp, clear scalpel. "Get me warm saline, bear hugger, now. What's his core temp?" A nurse already clipping a sensor to Caleb's earlobe as they transferred him to a gurney replied, "Too low to read, doctor. He's bradycardic." Jack stood, suddenly useless, his arms aching and empty, water dripping from his snow-caked uniform onto the clean linoleum. He watched them wheel the small body through a set of double doors, which swung shut with a pneumatic hiss, leaving him alone in the hallway. He was left with nothing but the adrenaline crash and the echoes. The hospital's sterile hum was a deafening roar in his ears. He was shaking, but not from cold. He was back in this exact building, this same ER, this same smell. 3 years ago, he had stood in this very spot, covered not in snow, but in rain and his wife's blood, begging a different doctor to save Sarah. He had failed. The building was a monument to his failure. He backed against the wall, sliding down into a plastic chair, his head in his hands, the image of Caleb's blue face merging with the memory of Sarah's last, gasping breath. He didn't know how long he sat there, minutes or an hour, lost in a fugue of grief and shock. "Officer? Officer Sullivan?" The voice was soft, not medical. He looked up. A woman stood before him, her hands clasped. She was not in scrubs. She wore dark slacks, a simple cashmere sweater, and professional, low-heeled boots. She was in her late 30s, her dark curly hair pulled back from an intelligent, empathetic face. Her warm brown eyes held a professional calm that was somehow more comforting than a doctor's hurried reassurances. "My name is Dr. Amelia Hayes," she said, her voice steady and low. "I'm the on-call child psychologist for the hospital. I was briefed by Dr. Vance. They're still working on him, but I wanted to be here when you had a moment." Jack just nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He didn't understand. A psychologist? He's just cold, Jack managed, his voice sounding hollow. "It's standard procedure in a case of suspected abandonment, officer," she explained gently. "The body is one thing, the mind is another. What you did, getting him here, you gave him a chance." She didn't pry or push, just established her presence, a calm anchor in his swirling panic. Before he could respond, the double doors hissed open again. Dr. Vance emerged, pulling his mask down. His face was grim, but his eyes were no longer frantic. "His core temperature is up to 92, the doctor said, his words clipped and exhausted. "He's still in the danger zone, but he's responding to the warming measures. His heart rate is stabilizing. He's a fighter. We're moving him to the pediatric ICU." Jack felt his knees weaken with relief. He's going to make it?" Dr. Vance met his gaze. "He survived the blizzard, officer. He survived you finding him. Now we see if he can survive the thaw." It was hours later, in the false gray light of a storm-choked dawn, before Jack was allowed to see him. The PICU was a different world from the ER. It was quiet. The only sounds the rhythmic, gentle beeping of monitors. Caleb lay in a pediatric bed with raised side rails, swallowed by a small hospital gown and a thermal blanket. The terrifying blue tint was gone, replaced by a pale, waxy white. An IV line ran into his small hand. His breathing was steady, and his eyes were open. He was awake. Jack moved to the bedside, his boots silent on the floor. "Hey," he whispered, his voice thick. "Hey there, bud. You gave us all quite a scare." Caleb's eyes, those enormous, solemn gray eyes, swiveled toward him, but there was no recognition, no fear, no relief, no anger. There was nothing. It was the most profound, terrifying emptiness Jack had ever seen. The boy just stared, his gaze fixed somewhere on the wall just past Jack's shoulder. "Caleb, can you hear me?" Jack asked, forcing a gentle tone. "My name is Jack. You're safe now. You're in a hospital." Caleb didn't blink. He didn't move. He didn't make a sound. It was as if Jack wasn't there. It was as if Caleb wasn't there. The only thing that moved was the slow, steady rise and fall of his chest, tethered to the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor. "He's been like this since we extubated," Dr. Hayes said from the doorway. She had been observing. She walked in, holding a small, laminated card with a smiley face on it. "Caleb, hi, my name is Amelia. It's so good to meet you. You are very, very brave." She held the card out. No response. She tried a small, soft teddy bear from her pocket. Nothing. She turned to Jack, her expression professionally troubled. "His vocal cords are fine. There's no physical reason for this. It's what we call selective mutism. It's a severe trauma response. He's not just silent, he's gone. He's locked himself inside where he thinks it's safe. Right now, he's a passenger in his own body." Jack felt a fresh wave of cold. "So, what do we do? How do we fix it?" "We don't," she said, her honesty brutal but necessary. "We wait. We create an environment so safe, so predictable, that he eventually chooses to come out. It could take a day, it could take a year, or—" She didn't finish the sentence. A nurse entered, holding a clear plastic bag labeled with Caleb's name. It contained the few items they had cut from his body: the oversized blue coat, the frozen mittens, and one small plastic firefighter, its red paint chipped from the cold. "These were his personal effects," the nurse said softly. She placed the small firefighter on the rolling bedside table. It was the first sign of life. Caleb's eyes, which had been locked on the wall, suddenly darted to the table, his gaze fixed on the toy. His body remained perfectly still, but his eyes locked onto that small piece of red plastic with a desperate, laser-like intensity. He didn't reach for it. He didn't cry, but he saw it. Dr. Hayes noted the reaction. "The toy," she whispered to Jack. "It's a connection. It's the first one we've seen." Jack stood by the window. The snow had finally stopped. The city was emerging in the pale, exhausted light of morning, a world reborn in white and silence. He looked from the paralyzed city to the silent boy in the bed. The physical rescue, the part he was trained for, was over. He had brought the body back. But the real person, The little boy who believed his parents were coming back for him was still out there, lost in the storm. And Jack, standing in the same hospital where he had lost his wife, felt an irrational, overwhelming, and terrifying sense of purpose. He hadn't been able to save Sarah, but God help him, he would not fail this boy. The next 3 days were a blur of bureaucratic gray. Caleb remained in the pediatric ICU, a silent, hollow-eyed ghost in a small bed. His physical recovery was remarkable. The bruises from the cold were fading, his systems were stable, and he was eating, but he did so mechanically, without desire. He was a small machine, taking in fuel, breathing, and staring. His gaze was perpetually fixed on the small red firefighter toy, which he now held in his left hand, refusing to let it go even in sleep. He was a puzzle with no edges, and the hospital, a place of action and answers, was growing impatient. Jack, meanwhile, fell into a fractured, obsessive rhythm. He worked his shifts at the K-9 unit in a fog of anger, his colleagues giving him a wide berth, and spent every off-duty hour in the plastic chair by Caleb's bedside, speaking in a low, gentle monologue that was met with absolute silence. On the 4th day, the administrative world finally caught up. Jack arrived at the hospital to find Dr. Hayes waiting for him outside Caleb's room, her usual empathetic expression creased with professional concern. Beside her stood a new woman. She was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. Her salt and pepper hair was pulled into a tight, no-nonsense bun, and she wore a practical wool coat over a simple blouse and slacks. She carried a thick, worn-out leather briefcase. "Officer Sullivan," Dr. Hayes began, "this is Maria Sanchez. She's the case manager from the Department of Children and Families." Jack's stomach tightened. He nodded to the woman. "Ma'am?" Maria Sanchez's handshake was firm, her gaze direct. She was not unkind, but she was clearly a person with no time to waste. "Officer Sullivan," she said, her voice carrying a faint Boston accent, "I've read your report, and the hospitals. What you did, you and your partner, it was incredible. You saved this boy's life." "Just doing my job, ma'am," Jack said stiffly. "Maybe," she countered, shifting her briefcase. "But now my job begins. I've spent 72 hours trying to locate the next of kin. The aunt, Lorraine Wells, she's vanished. Her apartment is empty, her phone is disconnected, and she never showed up for her last paycheck. As of right now, she's a ghost." Jack felt a cold fury. "So she just dumped him and ran." "It appears that way," Sanchez confirmed, her face hardening. "Which means Caleb John Doe, as his file currently reads, is officially a ward of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. He's medically cleared for discharge. My only option, officer, is to place him in a state-run foster facility." The words hit Jack like a physical blow. A facility, an institution. He pictured Caleb, silent and small, being led into a sterile room full of strangers, his trauma unseen and unheard. He thought of the boy's eyes, locked on that small red toy. "No," Jack said, the word coming out louder than he intended. Sanchez's eyebrows rose. "Excuse me, officer?" "No," Jack repeated, his voice lower, but vibrating with a sudden, unshakable certainty. You can't put him in a home, not like this. He's not just a file, he's broken. He needs stability, officer," Sanchez interrupted, though not unkindly, "which is what the system is designed to provide." "He needs stillness," Dr. Hayes interjected softly, stepping forward. "He needs a quiet, non-threatening environment. A facility, with all its rules, its noise, and its rotating staff, could cause him to retreat so far we might never get him back." Sanchez sighed, the sound of 1,000 impossible cases resting on her shoulders. "Doctor, I have 18 new cases this week. I don't have a quiet, non-threatening environment on speed dial. I have a bed. It's the best I can do." Jack looked through the small glass window in the door. Caleb was sitting up, staring at his toy, completely oblivious to the 3 adults deciding his fate. Jack's heart was hammering against his ribs. He heard the words coming out of his own mouth before his brain had fully formed them. "He can come with me." Both women stared at him. "Officer," Sanchez said slowly, "I think you know that's not possible. You're a single man, an active-duty police officer with a K-9. You're not a certified foster parent. So, certify me, Jack said, his blue eyes locking onto hers. I'm a cop. My background check is already on file. You know who I am. I have a house. I have room. You said he needs a quiet environment. It's just me and my dog. It doesn't get any quieter. He was pleading, and he hated it, but he didn't care. Don't send him to a facility. Please, give me temporary guardianship, emergency placement, just until you find a better option, or until he's ready for one. Dr. Hayes stepped in. Maria, she said, addressing the social worker, he's not wrong. The connection, Officer Sullivan is the one who found him. He's the only familiar face in Caleb's entire world right now, even if he doesn't respond to it. Sending him away could be catastrophic. I'll stake my professional reputation on it. Maria Sanchez looked at Jack, truly seeing him for the first time, not as a cop, but as a man defined by a fierce, sudden grief. She saw the pain in his eyes, the same pain she saw in 100 foster parents. She was quiet for a long time. It would be highly irregular, she said finally, but these are irregular circumstances. I'll make the call, but officer, you need to understand what you're asking. This isn't a dog you're rescuing. This is a child who might never speak again. I understand, Jack said, his voice raw. I don't care. 2 days later, after a mountain of emergency paperwork, fast-tracked by Jack's captain, and a glowing recommendation from Dr. Hayes, Jack was pulling his personal truck up to the hospital's discharge entrance. He walked out with Caleb. The boy was dressed in new, ill-fitting clothes provided by the hospital, clutching a small plastic bag in one hand and his red firefighter in the other. He moved like a small automaton, his feet shuffling, his eyes fixed on the cement. He didn't resist, but he didn't participate. He just existed. The drive to Jack's house, a small Cape-style home in the quiet working-class suburb of Roslindale, was the longest 20 minutes of Jack's life, filled with a suffocating, absolute silence. He led Caleb inside. The house was spotless, but it was not a home. It was a shrine. It smelled faintly of lemon oil and old memories. A photograph of a smiling, vibrant woman, Sarah, was on the mantelpiece. Her reading glasses were still on the nightstand in his bedroom. It had been 3 years, but Jack had perfectly preserved the scene of his old life. He had brought this silent, broken child into a mausoleum. This is it, Jack said, his voice echoing in the small hallway. This is home. Caleb just stood on the welcome mat, his gaze fixed on the hardwood floor. He looked like a small, lost doll. Okay, Jack said, trying to sound cheerful. Let's get you settled. He had set up a small child's bed in the guest room. He showed it to Caleb. This is your room. You can put your things here. Caleb didn't move. He just stood in the doorway, his small body rigid. Jack's heart sank. This was a mistake. He was a cop, not a father. He was in over his head. And then there was a sound, the click, click, click of claws on the hardwood floor. Zeus, who had been ordered to stay in the kitchen, emerged, his head low, his ears slightly back, his intelligent eyes fixed on the small, new human. Jack tensed. Zeus, stay, he commanded, his voice sharp. Zeus ignored the command. He walked slowly, unthreateningly, into the hallway. He didn't approach Caleb head-on. He circled wide, sniffing the air, his entire body language radiating calm submission. He stopped about 3 feet from the boy and lay down, his body parallel to Caleb's, his head resting on his paws. He let out a low, soft woof, more a puff of air than a bark. Caleb, who had not visibly reacted to any human in 5 days, flinched. His head, which had been permanently bowed, lifted a fraction of an inch. His eyes moved from the floor to the large, sable-coated animal. Zeus just watched him. He made no move to approach, no sudden gestures. He just was, present, calm. He let out a long, soft sigh, his chin resting on the floor. For a full minute, the boy and the dog just looked at each other. Then Zeus, in a gesture of profound instinctive intelligence, crawled forward on his belly, not toward Caleb's face, but toward his feet. He gently pushed his broad, warm head against Caleb's small, sneaker-clad foot. He didn't lick, he didn't nudge, he just rested there, a solid, warm, living presence. Caleb's entire body went rigid. Jack held his breath. He saw the boy's small hand, the one not holding the firefighter, clench into a tight, white-knuckled fist. The boy was trembling. Jack was about to intervene, to call Zeus back, but then he saw it. The fist slowly, painstakingly, unclenched, finger by finger. Caleb's small, pale hand, shaking with an effort that seemed to take all his remaining strength, reached out. He didn't reach for Zeus's head or back. He just lowered his hand, palm down, and rested it on the dog's shoulder. He didn't pet. He didn't stroke. He just made contact. Caleb's eyes closed, and for the first time, Jack saw the faintest trace of something other than terror. It was relief. Jack stood in the hallway, his heart aching, as he watched a traumatized boy who had been abandoned by his own blood and a working dog who had been trained for violence begin a silent, profound conversation that he could never be a part of. The thaw had begun. The passing of weeks did little to change the sound of Jack's house. It remained a place of profound, oppressive silence, a vacuum that even the ticking of the clock seemed to respect. Life settled into a fractured, fragile routine. Jack would wake before dawn, his cop-like efficiency now applied to making oatmeal he didn't know if a 5-year-old would eat. Caleb would emerge from the guest room, already dressed, his small red firefighter clutched in one hand. He would sit at the large kitchen table, his feet dangling high above the floor, and eat mechanically, his gaze fixed on the wood grain. He was the perfect heartbreaking house guest. He made no sound, left no bissinar, and asked for nothing. After breakfast, the true ritual began. Caleb would slide off the chair and find Zeus. The large German shepherd, instinctive and gentle, would be waiting, and Caleb would spend hours sitting on the floor, his back against the sofa, his small hand buried deep in the dog's thick, warm fur. He didn't pet the dog, he just held him, as if anchoring himself to the only living, breathing thing in the world that made sense. Jack, meanwhile, found himself adrift, a clumsy giant in this new, quiet world. He was a man of action, trained to breach doors, chase suspects, and follow evidence. He was not trained for this stillness. He was not trained to be a father to a ghost. His frustration found its only outlet at the precinct. The official investigation into Lorraine Wells had hit a wall so quickly it was baffling. He stood in the squad room, the smell of stale coffee and ink in the air, facing Detective Mike O'Malley. O'Malley was a 20-year veteran, a man whose rumpled suit and coffee-stained tie were a testament to his cynicism. His face was a roadmap of exhaustion, his mustache graying and untrimmed. To O'Malley, this was just another file in a mountain of human misery. "Jack, I'm telling you, the case is cold," O'Malley said, leaning back in his squeaking chair. "The woman's gone. Credit cards went dead the same day you found the kid. Phone is a burner, long gone. The landlord at her apartment says she paid cash for the last month's rent and vanished. There's no BOLO, no APB that's going to find a woman who wants to stay hidden. Far as the state is concerned, she's a missing person, and not a high-priority one. The kid's safe. That's the win. Take it." "That's not a win, Mike," Jack shot back, his voice low and dangerous. "That's a loose end. She committed attempted murder." O'Malley sighed, rubbing his tired eyes. "Look, Jack, we're not the DA. We can't prove she intended for him to die. Her lawyer, if she ever gets one, will say she panicked, that she was going to come back. It's a he said, she said, and the victim can't even talk. The case is on the back burner. I'm sorry. That's just how it is." Jack walked away, a cold, hard knot of anger in his gut. The system was failing. The blue wall he had dedicated his life to was shrugging its shoulders. He realized, with a chilling certainty, that if justice was going to be found, he would have to find it himself. His off-duty hours became a secret second job, a grim hunt for Lorraine's ghost. He started where the official investigation had stopped, her apartment. He used his badge and a thin story about retrieving the boy's personal items to get the building superintendent, a nervous man named Mr. Costa, to let him into the unit. The apartment was bleak, a 2-room box that smelled of stale cigarettes and pine cleaner. Lorraine had taken her clothes, but she had left in a hurry. The place felt violated, tossed. Drawers were pulled out. The cheap laminate flooring in the kitchen was scuffed from luggage being dragged. In the kitchen, under a pile of junk mail, he found it. A final notice, bright red, addressed to Lorraine Wells from a local storage facility, and tucked inside a takeout menu was a crumpled bank statement from a small regional credit union he didn't recognize. He pocketed both. It was a thread. He spent the next day pulling on it, calling in favors he knew he couldn't repay, blurring the lines of protocol he had always respected. The storage unit was a dead end. It had been auctioned off 2 months prior. But the bank was the key. A contact in the white-collar division ran the account number. It wasn't Lorraine's. The account was a trust, set up by Mark and Alara, Caleb's parents. It was a modest fund, the payout from a life insurance policy, meticulously saved for Caleb's future. Or it had been. Lorraine, as his legal guardian, had been granted access. The account, which had held nearly $80,000, had been completely liquidated. The transfer finalized just 6 hours before Caleb was found in the snow. Jack sat in his truck, staring at the printout. This wasn't panic. This wasn't a desperate woman snapping. This was a plan. She had taken the money, every last cent meant for the boy, and then she had driven him to the waterfront to erase the only witness. This grim discovery was punctuated by the weekly visits from Dr. Amelia Hayes. She had taken Caleb on as a private case, funded by a hospital discretionary fund, and made house calls, understanding that the sterile environment of an office would be useless. She would arrive, her presence a pool of calm in the tense household, and sit on the floor with Caleb, Zeus positioned between them like a fur-covered mediator. She never pushed him to speak. Instead, she brought art supplies. "Language isn't just words, Jack," she explained, as she laid out crayons and a large sketch pad. "For a child this traumatized, language is a threat. It's what the adult used to betray him. We have to find a new way in." For the first 2 sessions, Caleb wouldn't even touch the crayons. He just stared at his firefighter toy, his hand on Zeus. On the 3rd visit, Dr. Hayes simply began to draw. She drew a dog. A simple stick figure-like dog. Zeus. Caleb watched, his head tilted, just a fraction. Dr. Hayes pushed a blue crayon toward him. "Can you draw Zeus's leash?" she asked softly. Caleb looked at the crayon, then at her face, then at Zeus. His small, pale hand, the one not clutching the toy, crept forward. He picked up the crayon. His grip was awkward, stiff, but he put the crayon to the paper. He didn't draw a leash. He drew a line, and then another, and another. He drew a house, a small square box with a triangle roof. Then he picked up a red crayon. He drew a stick figure, then a yellow one. He drew 2 people, standing by the house, smiling. Jack, watching from the kitchen doorway, felt his throat tighten. "That's beautiful, Caleb," Dr. Hayes said gently. "Who is that?" Caleb looked at his drawing, his eyes wide and distant. He put the crayon down. He had finished. He picked up a black crayon. Slowly, methodically, he began to draw all around the house, all around the 2 smiling figures. He scribbled, his motions becoming more frantic, until the entire scene was covered in a thick, chaotic storm of black lines. He pressed so hard the crayon snapped. He stared at the ruined picture, his chest heaving, and then, without a sound, a single tear rolled down his cheek. Later, after Caleb had retreated back to the guest room, Jack stood with Amelia on the porch, the cold air a relief. "What was that?" Jack asked, his voice rough. "The black. That was the storm, wasn't it?" "Partly," Amelia said, zipping her coat. "The house, the smiling people, that's his parents, Mark and Alara." Jack's heart clenched. "He's not just drawing a memory, Jack. He's drawing what he was told. He's drawing the lie. He's showing us the hope Lorraine gave him. But the black? The black is what happened instead. It's the storm, it's the fear, it's the confusion. But more than that," she said, her brown eyes sad, "it's the prison. He's trapped. He's still sitting on that concrete block, in his mind, waiting for those 2 smiling people to walk out of the snow. And they never will. He can't move forward because he's still waiting for a rescue that's impossible." Jack stood on the porch long after she left, the cold seeping into his bones. He looked at the bank statement in his hand, the cold, hard proof of Lorraine's theft. And he thought of Caleb, inside, scribbling out his own hope with a black crayon. The system had failed. The case was cold, but Jack Sullivan didn't care. This was not a cold case anymore. This was personal. 2 months passed, and the city of Boston began to thaw. The historic blizzard, now relegated to memory and insurance claims, gave way to the gray, wet misery of an early New England spring. The mountains of snow, blackened by exhaust and plowed into solid icy ridges, finally began to recede, revealing the scarred pavement and dormant earth beneath. In Jack Sullivan's small house, a similar, hesitant thaw was underway. The silence remained, a thick woolen blanket over the home, but it was no longer the brittle, terrified silence of the hospital. It had become a language. Caleb had learned to navigate the house, his small feet pattering on the hardwood, his routine intersecting with Jack's. He would sit at the kitchen table, his hand no longer clenched around the firefighter toy, but resting beside his bowl, and his eyes would occasionally lift, tracking Jack's movements. He had even, on 2 occasions, emitted a tiny, sharp puff of air, almost a laugh, when Zeus, in a moment of play, had sneezed loudly while rolling on his back. Caleb had physically transformed. He was no longer the skeletal waxen figure from the snowbank. Consistent meals had put healthy weight on his small frame. His cheeks had a faint pale pink, and his hair, washed and trimmed, was a soft, healthy brown. He remained a ghost, but he was a ghost that was healing. His entire world, his entire sense of safety, was now intrinsically linked to 2 beings: Jack, the provider, and Zeus, the protector. The bond with the dog was the miracle Dr. Hayes had hoped for. Caleb spoke to Zeus, though not in words. He communicated through the pressure of his hand, the burying of his face in the dog's thick ruff, and the small, secret sighs Jack would hear when he thought no one was listening. Jack, for his part, had found a fragile purpose. He had stepped back from the abyss of Sarah's memory, his obsessive grief now channeled into this new, complex mission. His private investigation into Lorraine, however, had yielded nothing more. The bank account was empty, the ghost was gone, and Jack was left with only the cold, hard proof of a crime he couldn't get anyone to prosecute. The fragile peace shattered on a Tuesday. The rain outside was a cold, driving sheet. Jack was on the floor of the living room, patiently trying to help Caleb build a tower with wooden blocks, a frustrating exercise in one-sided communication. Caleb would only watch, his hand on Zeus's head. The knock on the door was not a polite tap. It was a sharp, official, metallic rap that echoed through the small house. It was the knock of authority. Zeus was on his feet instantly, a low rumble in his chest, moving to stand between Caleb and the door. Caleb himself flinched, his eyes wide, the blocks forgotten. "Stay Z," Jack commanded, his own senses tingling. He looked through the peephole. A man he didn't recognize, wearing a rain-soaked trench coat and holding a leather satchel, stood on his porch. Jack opened the door. "Officer Sullivan?" the man asked. He was a nondescript man in his 40s, his face neutral. "I am," Jack said. "You've been served," the man said, not unkindly. He handed Jack a thick, sealed manila envelope, turned, and walked back to his car. Jack stood in the doorway, the rain misting his face, the envelope heavy in his hand. He knew what it was. He could feel the cold dread of it. He shut the door, walked to the kitchen, and tore it open. It was a summons, a petition filed in the Suffolk County Family and Probate Court. The petitioner, Lorraine M. Wells. She was petitioning the court to dissolve the state's emergency wardship and demanding the immediate return of her nephew, Caleb, to her custody. It included a statement of intent, a temporary address at a long-term hotel, and a date for a preliminary hearing. In 3 days, Jack's vision narrowed. The audacity of it, the sheer brazen gall, took his breath away. He looked at the bank statement he had pinned to a corkboard in his kitchen. The $80,000 withdrawal. This wasn't a woman returning from a breakdown. This was a criminal returning to the scene of the crime. He called Maria Sanchez at DCF. "She has a right to petition, Jack," Maria's tired voice came over the phone. "The state of Massachusetts favors reunification. She was his legal guardian. Right now, on paper, you're just the emergency foster placement. She's the blood. She stole from him, Maria. She left him to die. And you will present that evidence at the hearing," Maria said. "But, Jack, get a lawyer, now. You're not a cop in that room. You're just a foster parent, and the system is on her side." The next 3 days were a waking nightmare. Jack found a lawyer through the police union, a straightforward, overworked man named Bill Jensen, who promised nothing. The hearing was not a trial. It was a preliminary conference, held in a small, sterile conference room at the DCF downtown office, not the courthouse. Jack arrived early, his gut tight, the bank statements in a folder under his arm. He sat at one side of a long, polished table. Maria Sanchez sat at the head. Dr. Hayes was there, at Jack's request. Then, the door opened. Lorraine Wells walked in, and Jack Sullivan's blood turned to ice. The woman from the blizzard, the haggard, mousy-haired figure with the chapped skin and bitter eyes, was gone. This woman was a stranger. Her hair was no longer a dull brown. It was a soft, expensive shade of honey blonde, styled in a sleek, professional bob. The bitter lines around her mouth seemed softer, perhaps smoothed by expensive moisturizers. She wore a powder blue cashmere sweater set, tailored gray flannel trousers, and low, costly-looking heels. She looked rested. She looked stable. She looked moneyed. This was what 80,000 bought. It bought a metamorphosis. She was not alone. Beside her was a man Jack instantly recognized, though not personally. This was Arthur Harrison. Harrison was one of the city's top-tier defense attorneys, a man known for his shark-like instincts, his $1,000 suits, and his ability to make juries believe the unbelievable. He was tall, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that probably cost more than Jack's truck, with a full head of silver hair and a deeply tanned, confident face. He radiated an aura of expensive, articulate arrogance. Harrison placed a hand on Lorraine's back, guiding her to the seat opposite Jack. "Ms. Sanchez," Harrison began, his voice a smooth, cultured baritone that filled the room. "Thank you for seeing us. My client, Ms. Wells, is here to rectify a terrible, terrible situation." Lorraine, on cue, dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. "Officer Sullivan," she whispered, her voice trembling beautifully. She looked at Jack, her eyes swimming with practiced tears. I don't know how to thank you for what you did, for finding him." Jack just stared, his face carved from granite. He said nothing. "My client," Harrison continued, opening a leather briefcase, "suffered a catastrophic psychological breakdown following the one-year anniversary of her sister's tragic death. She was grieving. She was overwhelmed. She wasn't in her right mind. She has spent the last 2 months in an intensive inpatient therapeutic facility in Connecticut, dealing with her grief and trauma." "An inpatient facility?" Maria Sanchez asked, her pen hovering over her notepad. "Indeed. We have the full medical discharge report," Harrison said smoothly, sliding a thick, professionally bound document across the table. "She is now stabilized, has secured new housing, and is emotionally and financially prepared to resume the care of her only living relative, a nephew she adores." "She abandoned him," Jack said, his voice a low growl. "She faltered," Harrison corrected, his tone sharp. "She had a dissociative episode, officer, a tragic temporary break from reality, and now she is well, and she wants her boy back." Lorraine broke into a quiet, dignified sob. I just want to hold him," she whispered. Jack looked at the woman, her highlighted hair, her manicured nails, her expensive sweater. He saw the bank statement in his mind. Inpatient facility, a lie. A brilliant, expensive lie, purchased with Caleb's own money. She hadn't just run, she had invested. She had used that stolen inheritance to wash herself clean, to build a legal fortress, to buy the best shark in the city, and to create a narrative so compelling that a judge might actually believe it. This wasn't about reunification. This was about the rest of the trust, the main fund, the real money. She couldn't access it without the child. Jack looked at his own crumpled bank statement and then at Harrison's polished, bound medical report. He realized in that cold, sterile room that he was utterly, terrifyingly outgunned. The Suffolk County Family and Probate Court was a place where hope went to be dissected. The building was old, smelling of floor wax, damp wool, and the faint, acidic tang of human desperation. Unlike the sterile DCF conference room, this was a formal courtroom, paneled in dark, imposing wood, with a high ceiling that seemed to press down on everyone. Jack sat at the respondent's table, his back rigid. He wore his only suit, a dark charcoal wool that felt too tight in the shoulders. Behind him sat Bill Jensen, his union-appointed lawyer, a man in his 50s, with a kind, rumpled face and a briefcase that had seen better decades. A few feet away, in a chair so small he looked like a doll, sat Caleb. He was clutching his red firefighter, his eyes wide and vacant, fixed on the intricate seal of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts carved into the wall. Then, the opposing side entered. Arthur Harrison, the shark, strode in, his silver hair immaculate, his navy pinstripe suit exuding an aura of effortless victory. He was followed by Lorraine. Her transformation was even more complete than before. She wore a simple dark green dress, a picture of demure penitence. Her blonde highlighted hair was pulled back, her face pale, and makeup applied to suggest sleepless nights of remorse. She looked like a grieving mother, not a felon. She dabbed her eyes as she sat, her gaze flickering toward Caleb with a look of practiced, agonizing love. Jack's hands clenched into fists under the table. "All rise," the bailiff called. Judge Eleanor Shaw entered. She was a woman in her late 50s, her face etched with the weariness of seeing too many families tear themselves apart, but her eyes were sharp and missed nothing. She sat, adjusted her robes, and looked down at the file. Case 9A445. In the matter of Caleb Wells. This is a hearing on the petition by the biological aunt, Ms. Lorraine Wells, for the dissolution of state wardship and the return of custody. She looked at Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, you may begin." "Thank you, Your Honor," Harrison said, rising, his voice a smooth, confident baritone. "My client, Ms. Wells, is not here to make excuses. She is here to atone." He began to paint a masterful picture, using the fraudulent medical report. He described a woman shattered by her sister's death, overwhelmed by responsibility, who suffered a transient dissociative psychotic break. He painted the abandonment not as a crime, but as a symptom. "She didn't run, Your Honor. She fled. She fled in a state of terror and confusion, and immediately checked herself into a facility to get the help she so desperately needed, the help she has now received." Lorraine performed a quiet, heartbreaking sob on cue. Harrison let the sound hang in the air before continuing. "And while she was healing, her nephew, Caleb, was placed with this man." He gestured toward Jack. "Officer Jack Sullivan. A man who, by all accounts, is a fine police officer. A man who tragically lost his own wife 3 years ago. A man who, we must assume, is desperately lonely." "Objection," Bill Jensen said, rising slowly. "Counsel is testifying. Motive is not relevant." "Overruled," Judge Shaw said, her eyes narrowed. "I'll allow him to connect it. Get to the point, Mr. Harrison." "The point, Your Honor," Harrison said, turning to Jack, "is that this is a case of tragic transference. Officer Sullivan, a grieving widower, finds a child. He doesn't see a ward of the state. He sees a replacement. He sees a chance to build the family he lost. His motives, while perhaps understandable, are fundamentally selfish. He is clinging to this child to heal his own trauma, while my client, the boy's only living blood relative, the woman who raised him, sits here, healed, stable, and desperate to bring her family back together. We ask that the court do the right thing and reunite this broken family." Harrison sat down. The room was silent. He had taken Jack's heroism and twisted it into a dark, selfish obsession. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. It was Bill Jensen's turn. He was steady, but he was a rowboat against a battleship. "Your Honor, Mr. Harrison paints a very moving picture, but it's fiction." He introduced the bank statements. This is fact. This is an $80,000 withdrawal from Mr. Wells's trust fund, transferred to an untraceable account just 6 hours before he was found. This isn't a psychotic break, Your Honor. This is a heist. This is grand larceny, followed by attempted murder. "Objection!" Harrison was on his feet. "My client was not in her right mind. She has admitted to moving assets in a state of paranoia, and she is prepared to make full restitution as soon as the boy's full trust is available to her." Judge Shaw held up a hand. "The financial records are noted, Mr. Jensen, but they are not, in themselves, proof of intent to abandon. It's a matter for a different court. What I am concerned with here is the well-being of the child." She looked at her notes. "I see the child is in therapy with a Dr. Amelia Hayes. Is she present?" "She is, Your Honor," Bill said. Dr. Hayes was called. She was calm, professional, and clear. She described Caleb's condition: selective mutism, severe PTSD. She presented the drawings, the 2 smiling parents, the house, and the violent black storm of scribbles that had consumed them. "Caleb is trapped, Your Honor," she explained. "He is trapped in the moment of the lie his aunt told him. He is still waiting for his parents to come." "And you believe he cannot speak, Doctor?" Judge Shaw asked. "He will not speak, Your Honor. He has disassociated as a defense mechanism." "And is he capable of expressing a preference? Can he tell this court where he wants to live?" "No, Your Honor, not in words, but his actions are clear. He has formed a profound nonverbal attachment to Officer Sullivan. And Dr. Hayes paused, taking a breath. Your Honor, I have a procedural request. Caleb's ability to remain present, even in this limited capacity, is almost entirely dependent on his therapeutic support animal. Harrison scoffed. A support animal? We are in a court of law. What animal, doctor? The judge asked, her patience thinning. Officer Sullivan's canine partner, Zeus, the dog that found him. The bond is the only reason he has made any progress. I am asking the court to allow the animal to be present, to sit with the child. Without him, I cannot guarantee Caleb's stability. Harrison was on his feet. This is a circus. It's prejudicial. The man is using his police dog to intimidate my client. Mr. Harrison, sit down, the judge snapped. She looked at Dr. Hayes. You believe this is medically necessary? I do. Judge Shaw sighed, pinching the bridge of her nose. Fine. Bailiff, arrange it. 10-minute recess. When they returned, Zeus was brought in, not in his police vest, but in a simple support animal harness. He ignored the gallery, the lawyers, and the judge, walked directly to Caleb, and lay down, his body a solid warm wall against the boy's legs. For the first time that day, Caleb's small hand moved, dropping from the firefighter toy to grip the dog's fur. Judge Shaw watched this, her expression unreadable. Very well, she said. I have read the reports. I have heard the arguments. While the financial allegations are deeply troubling, Mr. Harrison is correct that this is a family court. The law prioritizes reunification. My ruling is... Your Honor, please! Lorraine stood up, her voice breaking. Harrison put a hand on her arm, but she shook it off, her performance peaking. Please, may I just speak to him? He doesn't understand. Caleb, please. Before the bailiff could stop her, she took 3 steps toward the respondent's table, her face a mask of love and tears. She knelt down, putting herself at Caleb's eye level. Ms. Wells, return to your seat, the judge commanded, but Lorraine ignored her. She was focused only on Caleb, who had frozen, his knuckles white on Zeus's harness. Caleb? Honey, look at me. It's me. It's Aunt Lorraine. Her voice dropped into the same syrupy, conspiratorial whisper Jack had heard in his nightmares. I'm here, baby. I came back. See? I told you to wait. Mommy and Daddy, they couldn't come. They were too late, but I'm here. I came back for you. Let's go home, sweetheart. Let's go home. She reached out, her manicured hand moving toward his face. Zeus let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the floor. Jack tensed. Don't touch him. Caleb's body was shaking. He stared at her new hair, her new face. He heard the lie, the same lie that had left him in the snow, the lie that he had been drawing, the lie that had broken him. He saw her hand coming closer. He looked at Jack, he looked at Zeus, and then he looked back at Lorraine. The silence in the room was absolute. He opened his mouth. A sound tore from his throat, a sound that was rusty, raw, and full of all the frozen, silent rage of the past 2 months. It was a word. It was a shout. It was an earthquake. Liar! The word echoed off the high ceiling. Lorraine reconciled as if she'd been slapped. Harrison's jaw dropped. Dr. Hayes gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The judge's eyes went wide. Jack half rose from his chair, his heart stopping. Caleb was trembling, his eyes wild, terrified by the sound of his own voice. But he was there. He was present. And he was glaring at Lorraine with an expression of pure, unadulterated knowing. Liar! The echo of the word liar hung in the air of the dark-paneled courtroom, a raw, physical thing. It was a sound so absolute, so primal, that it seemed to suck all other noise into a vacuum. Lorraine Wells was frozen, her kneeling posture a grotesque parody of supplication, her face, which had been a mask of practiced grief, now a blank slate of pure, unadulterated shock. Her mouth hung open. Arthur Harrison, the shark, was for the first time in his professional life completely silent, his silver-tongued confidence utterly shattered. Dr. Hayes had her hands over her heart, tears openly streaming down her face. Bill Jensen, Jack's lawyer, simply closed his eyes, a small, relieved smile on his face. And Jack was staring at Caleb, his heart hammering so hard he thought it would break through his ribs. He wasn't looking at the judge or the lawyer or Lorraine. He was looking at his boy. Caleb was breathing in ragged, gasping sobs, terrified by his own voice, his small body trembling, but he held his ground. His eyes, no longer vacant, were blazing with a 5-year-old's absolute terrible clarity. He had been pulled from the gray, silent fog and back into the world by the one thing strong enough to do it, the lie that had put him there. Zeus, sensing the emotional earthquake, didn't bark, but he rose from his lying position to a seated guard posture, a solid, warm wall pressed against Caleb's back. A silent, "I am here." The silence was broken by the sharp, authoritative crack of a gavel. Judge Eleanor Shaw, who had been leaning forward, her entire body rigid, now sat back. Her face was no longer weary or impartial. It was a mask of cold, controlled fury. "Ms. Wells," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a razor, "return to your seat. Now." Lorraine scrambled to her feet, stumbling, her expensive heels scraping on the floor. Her mask of grief was gone, replaced by a blotchy, red-faced panic. He doesn't... It's the dog," she stammered, pointing the shaking finger at Zeus. "That man, he's trained that animal to make him..." "Silence," Judge Shaw's voice snapped a squirrel whip. "Mr. Harrison, control your client, or I will have her removed." Harrison, pale and fumbling, pulled Lorraine into her chair. "Your Honor, clearly the child is agitated." "The child is present, Mr. Harrison," the judge retorted. "Dr. Hayes, in your professional opinion, what just happened?" Dr. Hayes stood, wiping her cheeks. "Your Honor, what happened was a breakthrough. Ms. Wells provided a stimulus so precise, so identical to the original trauma, that it broke through his dissociative state. He's not just repeating a word. He has made a judgment. He has identified his betrayer." The judge nodded, a single, curt motion. She looked down at the reams of paper, the fraudulent medical report, the bank statements, but they were all just paper. She looked at Caleb, who was now quietly weeping into Zeus's fur, his small hand still holding his firefighter toy. She looked at Jack, who had a protective hand on Caleb's back. "Mr. Jensen, I believe the financial documents you presented are no longer a matter for another court. They are the motive. They are the why. Mr. Harrison, your client's petition for reunification, based on a transient psychotic break, is a masterwork of fiction. But in the face of this," she gestured to Caleb, "it is an insult to this child and to this court. The petition is denied permanently." "Your Honor," Harrison started, but the judge held up a hand. "I am not finished, counsel. Effective immediately, I am stripping Ms. Lorraine Wells of any and all parental or guardianship rights to the minor child, Caleb Wells. They are terminated permanently. Furthermore," she continued, her voice growing colder, "I am forwarding this entire file, including Mr. Jensen's evidence of grand larceny and the Boston Police Department's report on child endangerment, to the district attorney's office with my strongest recommendation for immediate criminal prosecution." "You can't!" Lorraine shrieked, her voice no longer a cultured whisper, but the harsh, grating cry of the woman who had driven a sedan in a blizzard. "It was my money. He was my burden. You can't take him." "Bailiff, remove her," Judge Shaw said, her voice flat. As the bailiff approached, Lorraine lunged, not toward Caleb but toward Jack. "You!" she screamed. "You did this! You and your monster! You stole him!" Zeus was on his feet, his teeth bared in a snarl, but Jack simply stood up, shielding Caleb with his own body, as the bailiff grabbed Lorraine's arms. Arthur Harrison sat, defeated, already calculating his fees as he watched his client, screaming and sobbing, being physically dragged from the courtroom. The doors slammed shut. The silence that returned was deep and profound, but it was no longer empty. It was the silence of peace. Judge Shaw looked at Jack, and for the first time, her eyes were soft. "Officer Sullivan, you are a brave man. You are also a very foolish one." Jack looked up, confused. "To take this on," she clarified, "but this court sees no better placement. I am extending your temporary guardianship indefinitely, pending the outcome of the criminal trial. After that, I strongly suggest you speak to Mr. Jensen about adoption." She looked at Caleb, who was peeking out from behind Jack. "Good luck, Caleb," she said softly. "Court is adjourned." 1 year later, the world was green. The small Cape-style house in Roslindale was no longer a silent, preserved mausoleum. The photograph of Sarah was still on the mantel, but now it was surrounded by a chaotic, colorful clutter of crayon drawings, Lego towers, and two mismatched sneakers. The house smelled of peanut butter, dog, and life. Outside, in the small, fenced-in backyard, a 6-year-old boy was shrieking with laughter. "Zeus! No! That's cheating! Drop it!" Caleb, his face bright, his eyes clear, was in a frantic tug-of-war with the German Shepherd over a worn-out rope toy. He was no longer a ghost. He was a boy. The road had been long. After the courtroom, he had been silent again for a week, as if the single word had cost him everything. But the dam was broken. It had started with yes and no. Then Zeus. Then, one morning, 6 months in, Jack had been making oatmeal, and a small voice from the table said, "It's hot." Jack had frozen, his heart stopping, before he turned and smiled. "Yeah, bud, it is." From there, the words had come like a flood. "Caleb, time to go," Jack called from the back door. He was in jeans and a worn Red Sox sweatshirt, the picture of a suburban dad. He had officially adopted Caleb 3 months ago. The criminal trial had been swift. Lorraine, facing overwhelming evidence and the loss of her expensive lawyer, who had not been paid, pleaded guilty. She was serving a 5 to 7 year sentence. Vince, her boyfriend, had been charged as an accessory. "Coming!" Caleb yelled. He wrestled the toy from Zeus, threw it, and ran to Jack, grabbing his hand. The three of them, man, boy, and dog, got in the truck. They drove, not to a park, but to the quiet green expanse of a cemetery in West Roxbury. They walked, Caleb's hand in Jack's, to a simple granite headstone that read, "Mark and Alara Wells." Caleb placed a drawing on the grass. It was the one he had drawn for Dr. Hayes, the house and the 2 smiling stick figures. But he had added a new figure, a small boy, holding their hands. Then Jack led him a few rows over to another familiar stone, Sarah Sullivan. Jack knelt, tracing his wife's name, as he always did. Caleb, in a motion he had clearly decided on himself, stepped forward and placed his other drawing on her stone. It was a drawing of 3 figures, a tall man, a small boy, and a large dog, all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. Jack looked at the drawing, his vision blurring. He put his arm around Caleb's shoulders. I think she would have loved that, Caleb," he whispered. "I know," Caleb said simply, leaning his head against Jack's side. "I love her, too." They stood there for a long time, 2 broken families made whole, their pasts not erased but honored. As they walked back to the truck, Jack looked up at the clear blue sky. He had been a man frozen in his own storm, a man who had lost his faith in everything. But on a night of impossible cold, God, or fate, or whatever name one chose for the force that binds us, had sent a second blizzard. He hadn't just saved a boy. The boy and his dog had saved him. They had found each other. They were the Sullivans. And for the first time in a long time, Jack Sullivan was home. The story of Jack, Caleb, and Zeus reminds us that even in our coldest, darkest storms, miracles can happen. God works in mysterious ways, sending angels to guide us when we feel lost. Sometimes that angel is a kind stranger. Sometimes it's a loyal dog. He didn't stop the blizzard, but he sent a rescuer through it. In our own lives, remember that God never abandons us. He turns our deepest losses into new beginnings. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories of hope and faith. Comment below to share what moved you most. May God bless and protect you and your families, and may He send angels to guide you through your own storms. Thank you for watching.